Today, for Haunted History, we're going to tell this tale of the Schuylkill Avenue of Pottsville's Civil War ghost. So, this story was actually discovered by a lady that does haunted history type stuff up in the coal region, Schuylkill County, and so on. And this particular story is set in Pottsville. And there was an older lady that came to one of her lectures where she talked about all his haunted stories. And she said, if you had the time, I have a really, really neat story. Now, this had to go back to her grandmother's house. And as a little girl, she used to stay there all the time. And they'd be sitting there. The grandmother's favorite place to sit was in a small sitting room down on the first floor. And they would sit down there, they would play games, they would eat some snacks and talk and tell stories and things like that. And every now and then, her grandmother would all of a sudden get very, very quiet and still. And then all of a sudden just be like, it's time to go to bed. And she would take her upstairs to her room and they would wrap up. And she would just see there was a tension in the air. And this would happen, because she was there quite often. It would happen only every now and then. But eventually the grandmother would not have her over as often anymore. And she never would explain why. The little girl, this lady who was telling the story, who was now an older lady, said the grandmother would never explain to her what was actually going on. And as she grew up into her 20s, she decided she wanted to spend more time with her grandmother again. And they would have some of these same type moments where she would all of a sudden pause, a tension would come in the air, and she would grow very, very quiet. And the younger lady, she would ask her grandmother, what's going on? I remember this from back when I was a kid. This same eerie thing would happen. What's going on? So the grandmother remained quiet and she said, okay, you're of age, I can tell you. So she would go on to tell her that she would have this feeling that someone was in the house with her. And it would just unnerve her, like someone was watching, and she would never see anything until on one particular occasion, for the first time, she was looking over, she felt this tension, somebody was watching her, it got a little colder, and she looked over towards the one doorway to a hallway, and she could have swore she saw a young man dressed in like an older outfit, like a military outfit, walk by the door. And so she was pretty brave, even though she was scared out of her mind. She got up, went over to the doorway and looked down the hallway, and there standing at the end of the hallway was a young man with like a pained expression in his eyes, and he just sort of looked at her and their eyes met. And he was in like this, not really shimmering, but almost translucent ghost-like figure. And he sort of beckoned her like he wanted her to follow him. So she started to, and he went, got out of her view, and then she went to follow, and here he was standing at the bottom of a staircase, and once again beckoned her, and she was still frightened, so he had gone out of view, and she sort of stopped at the top of the stairs when she followed and saw him once again down the hall, and sort of beckoned her again, and she followed. So he went to where the steps went up to the attic, and once again beckoned her to follow, and she did eventually. And once she got up there into the attic, he was standing at the 3/4 of the way down the attic, and sort of turned around and walked right through the wall on the other side. Well, she went over there, and there was sort of, where he walked through the wall, there was a small door, like a cubby door, and she opened it up, and a cold air came out of this door, wherever it led, and she got down on her knees and felt around in there, And here she found a small ancient wooden box. And she pulled it out, opened it up, and there were these rags in there that almost looked like they were blood-stained. And she ruffled through them, and within there, underneath all that, was a piece of old paper that had the name of a Civil War soldier. And she didn't know quite what to do with that, but she assumed that was him. So she would go on throughout her life in that home until she passed away a couple years later. She would say that she would see this guy every now and then, never felt like threatened or anything like that, or like any kind of maliciousness. Whether this young man was attached to the home or was more so attached to this small box that had blood-stained cloths and that was his name and that was his blood, don't know. But it was such a unique story. So many of these odd things happen, and there's so many great stories from Pottsville, from Nicholas Biddle, and all those other things. 'Cause these are areas that have a very strong military presence in the stories that people served. You could go throughout these Schuylkill County towns and the war memorials and such. There's a real connection to that. And this story is certainly a connection to that history. But it's another one of those haunted history stories that are just so powerful and really amazing bits of our hometown history. We'll see you all about town.